Hilchos Temurah Perek Shlishi, the laws of forbidden exchange, chapter 3. We're talking for the last 2 days about Temurah, the forbidden exchange. What is the principle of Temurah? You have an animal which is meant to be offered as a sacrifice. You're trying to transfer that sacrifice to another animal. You want to put an unholy animal in place of the sacrifice. Even if you think it's better, certainly if it's worse, Torah disallows it completely. So much so that if you do such an exchange, we have a penalty. Both the original animal and the animal you tried to put in as the exchange become holy. But we have to define, what does that mean it becomes holy? What do you do with an animal that you tried to use in this exchange? That's the topic of the majority of today's chapter. At the end of the chapter, we deal with an interesting case of what happens if you have two sacrifices or multiple sacrifices mixed together and you did Temurah with one of the animals and you don't know which sacrifice you did it with. But the majority of the chapter deals with when you know what sacrifice it was and what do you do with the exchanged animal. So the Rambam begins, Halacha Aleph, Ketzad din haTemuros likarev. What is the law for these animals used in forbidden exchanges with regards to offering them? And the Rambam divides it by category of sacrifice. Temuras ha'oila, the animal that you try to exchange for a burnt offering, tikrav oila. It itself also has to be offered as a burnt offering. Of course, if it meets the qualifications of a burnt offering, it has to be unblemished and it has to be a male. What do you do if not? What if the animal you tried to put in as the exchange was a female or it had a blemish? Those cannot be offered as a burnt offering. So in the case of a female, says the Rambam, tira hanekeva ad sheyipil bamum. The female should graze, just leave it in the zoo till it gets a blemish. V'timacher, and then you sell it. V'yavi b'dameh ha'ila, and you use the proceeds to buy a burnt offering. And when it comes to the blemished animal, of course, the principle is the same. You don't have to wait because it's already blemished. You simply sell it, and with the proceeds, you buy a burnt offering, which you actually offer in the holy temple. That's as far as the oila, the burnt offering. What about temuras hachatas, an animal used to exchange for a sin offering? So this we actually already learned in the last book. Says that Rambam Tamus, it's one of those animals that has to be left to die. A tragic death, you put it in a stall, you basically lock it there till it dies. As we explained in the laws of disqualified sacrifices, there's a special rule when it comes to the sin offering that the animal that you use to try to exchange it needs to be left to die. Temuras ha'asham, what about the animal that you tried to exchange for a guilt offering? So you can't tell a person to now offer another guilt offering. You only offer guilt offerings if you're guilty. So what do you do with the second animal? You leave it to graze till it develops a blemish. And its money will go to the voluntary offering box in the Holy Temple, which they basically would bring burnt offerings whenever the altar wasn't busy. Simply to keep the altar busy, they would bring these sacrifices in the temple, so that money goes towards the Nidava. Temuras hashlamim, what about an animal that was used in exchange for a peace offering? So, kashlamim, l'chol davar. A peace offering you could bring voluntarily at any time. So we simply treat the exchange as a peace offering for all matters. To unasmicha, when you're going to bring it, it has to have leaning, the special leaning that we do before bringing a sacrifice. Unasachim, it requires libations, flour, wine, and oil. L'tnufas chazav b'shoik, you have to put aside the breast and the foreleg, and you wave it in the special way that we wave the shlamim. Basically, it's treated exactly like a shlamim. Temuras hatoida, so too, the animal used in exchange for a Thanksgiving offering, katoida, needs to be offered in the very same way as a Thanksgiving offering is offered, with one exception, ela she'eina tu'una lechem. It doesn't require bread. The Thanksgiving offering has to be accompanied by 40 loaves of bread, 30 of which are matzah, 10 are chametz. This one, since it isn't really a Thanksgiving offering, so it doesn't have that accompanying bread. As we also explain in the laws of disqualified sacrifices. Temuras haPesach, an animal that you tried to exchange for a Passover sacrifice. So here, it gets a little interesting. The law depends on when you tried to do the exchange. If you did the exchange before midday of the 14th of Nisan, which is before the time that the obligation to actually bring an offering, Passover offering, devolves, ein temuras kreva. So then the animal that was used in the exchange cannot be offered. And the commentaries explain why. Until midday of the 14th of Nisan, even if you've put aside an animal for the Passover offering, you can always switch it. It never becomes established as the Passover offering till midday hits. Instead, you can put it aside for a different one, and if you do that, the animal that you originally put aside has to be offered as a korban shlamim, as a peace offering, as we explained earlier in this book in the laws of korban Pesach. Therefore, the Passover offering before midday is basically neither here nor there. It doesn't have an established type of holiness, and therefore it's not powerful enough to allow its exchange to also be offered. It's powerful enough to make its exchange holy, but not to be offered as an actual sacrifice. And therefore, what do? You let it graze till it gets a blemish. And with the proceeds, you bring a peace offering. Because in many ways, the Passover and peace offerings are equated. But if you made the exchange after midday, after the obligation devolved, and the holiness of this specific animal was established to be that of a carbon Pesach, so now it can grab hold of the exchange and make it as holy as itself, to require it itself to be offered, albeit not as a carbon Pesach, because you can only bring one Passover offering, but we will bring the actual animal of exchange, the actual exchange animal will be offered as a peace offering. Halacha beis, that's how many texts have it. Some texts have halacha beis a little bit later, but it's definitely a new subject here. Tmuras habechoyer v'hamaiser. What do we do with the exchange that a person tried to exchange for a firstborn or for an animal tithe? Which, as we saw earlier in this book, also always have the same laws. Torah puts them together, the Rambam puts them together, most of their laws are the same. So if you try to exchange these animals, einam krevin lo'ilam, they're never offered. Shenemar ba'bechor, because we have a special verse. When it comes to the bechor, it says, La Hashem hu. It is to be offered to God. We learn from tradition to interpret this verse, hu karev ve'ein tmurasa kreva. Why does it say it? Torah is hinting to this case. Only it must be offered, and its exchange should not be offered. V'din hamaiser kabcher. And whatever applies to the firstborn also applies to the animal tithe. So therefore, the exchange for the animal tithe also is not offered. Instead, what do you do with these exchanges? Temurasan tire ad sheyipel bamum v'te'achel. The exchange should be left to graze till they get a blemish, and they're simply eaten. Just like an actual firstborn animal is eaten by the Kohen, and an actual animal tithe is eaten by its owners, usually after bringing a sacrifice, but once they get a blemish, you can eat it just regularly. So too with the Temurah. Once it gets a blemish, you eat it regularly. Tmuras ha-bechor la-koyanim, u'tmuras ha-maiser la-bailim. The exchange of the bechor will go to the Kohen like the bechor itself, and the exchange of the animal tithe will go to the owner. Ukeshem she'ein paidin b'chayru maiser, shenafal b'hem mum, the same way you would never redeem a firstborn or an animal tithe which got a blemish, as we explained in the last book, in the laws of forbidden entities to be offered on the altar. Kach ein paidim tmurah, some we also don't redeem their tmurah. You simply pass them on to the person that usually would belong to, and they get to eat it as a regular animal once it gets a blemish. Halacha gimel behema shehikdisha chetzia oila v'chetzia shlamim. What happens if you have an animal which you had consecrated originally to be half burnt offering and half peace offering? Now, typically, in that case, forget the Temurah issue, you obviously cannot offer that animal because it's neither a peace offering nor a burnt offering. What do? You sell it, and the proceeds you use to buy a burnt offering and a peace offering. Therefore, says the Rambam, Temurah kamaya, if a person were to do an exchange with such an animal, the Temurah would be treated in the exact same way. You would have to wait till it gets a blemish, sell it, and bring two offerings with the proceeds. And the same principle applies. Any holy animal which cannot be offered because of the circumstances surrounding the time that it was consecrated. When it was originally consecrated, it wasn't able to be offered for whatever reason. If somebody does exchange with that type of animal, it will be treated in the exact same way. Omar, what if a person says, I want half of this animal to be exchange, and half of it to be a burnt offering. So, as we remember, in the beginning of these laws we learned that Temurah cannot be done with parts of an animal. When you make an exchange, you have to exchange a whole animal for a whole animal. So these words, Chatzi behema zu Temurah, are basically invalid. They have no meaning because you can't do Temurah to half an animal. But we remember from the laws of consecrating sacrifices that if you say that half an animal is a burnt offering, what's called Pashta Kedusha Bekula, the holiness extends to the entirety of the animal. It's a valid statement and the entire animal becomes a burnt offering. So here you made both statements. Chatzi behema zu Temurah v'chetzia oila. Since only one of them is valid, that's the one we follow. Harezu tikrav oila. This animal should be fully offered as a burnt offering, and the fact that you mentioned Temurah is of no consequence. Similarly, if you said chetzia oila v'chetzia maiser, I want it to be half burnt offering and half animal tithe. So same thing. The half of the burnt offering statement is a valid statement. It will simply extend to the entirety of the animal. When it comes to animal tithes, we learned earlier in the laws relating to animal tithes that ein meiser lachatzayin, no such thing as a half an animal tithe, and therefore that's an invalid statement. So the chetzia oila overpowers, and tikrav oila, the entire animal, is offered as a burnt offering. Now what if you said chetzia Temurah v'chetzia meiser? You made two invalid statements. You said it's a half a Temurah and a half an animal tithe. Harezu safik ve'ein lakreva. This is a doubt, and we cannot offer it. You simply leave it to get a blemish, and then you'll sell it, and you'll bring it as another sacrifice, a voluntary offering, or an animal tithe. Halacha dalid hamakdish ba'al asmum oiver. What if a person consecrates an animal that has a passing blemish? It's going to recover. So in its current state, it cannot be offered, but it technically could be offered once it's going to heal. Needless to say, if you had consecrated an animal that was totally unblemished and totally fit for offering. And then it got a permanent blemish, which disqualifies it from being offered. What do we do with a typical Baal Asmum? V'niftes. It was redeemed. Wonderful, everything's going great. You redeem it, you transfer the holiness to money, the money you're going to buy a new sacrifice. The thing is, as we learned, even once a Baal Mum is redeemed, it retains somewhat of its holiness. So what if a person tries, v'heimir ba'achar sheniftes? A person tries to exchange that leftover holiness onto another animal after it's already been redeemed. So of course it's not holding on to its full level of sanctity, but it has some level of sanctity, and now he did Temurah. Says the Rambam, harezu Temurah. The holiness is effective enough to grab hold of the exchange and to make the exchange holy. Ve'eina kreva ve'eina niftis, but it's in limbo. It cannot be offered and it cannot be redeemed. Elamanicha chetamus, you must leave it to die. Eina kreva, you cannot offer it, rationalizes the Rambam, because the whole reason why this animal is holy is because of the other animal that's holy. But that animal is what's called kedusha dechuya, rejected holiness, because it's already been redeemed. It's not holy enough to be offered anymore. So that's not powerful enough to make the next one in line have to be offered. Ve'ena niftes, but it also cannot be redeemed, she'ein bekoyach kedushasa lispais pidyaina, because its holiness is not powerful enough to grab hold of its redemption money. These are all ethereal principles, but the idea being an animal has to be fully holy in order to be able to transfer its holiness onto the money. If you're only quasi-holy, it's not powerful enough of a holiness to land on the money, and therefore it can never be redeemed. So this animal is left not here nor there, and therefore has to be left to die. Halacha hey, kol hatmurais shahayu ba'alei mumin kvuin mitchilasam. Any animal used in exchange that had a blemish to begin with. So we have here an animal that's a sacrifice, and you try to exchange it for this animal. Thing is, this animal, which is an unholy animal, it already has a blemish, a permanent blemish, which is disqualifying it from being offered. Says the Rambam, hare'elu yipadu. What we do is we have to redeem them. They become holy, fully holy. And an animal that's fully holy with a mum has to be redeemed. So we have to also redeem this animal. But they do not become fully chulin for all matters. They don't become fully unholy. So that, for example, say they should be permitted to be sheared or to be worked with after redemption. In other words, the Rambam is saying they're the same as a sacrifice that gets a mum kavua. A regular animal that's a sacrifice gets a mum kavua, and you redeem it. Like I said before, it retains some of its holiness. You still can't shear it. You still can't work with it. Same as with the Temurah. Even though the Temurah entered the picture with this blemish, doesn't matter. The holiness takes effect on it fully. Unlike regular consecration, where were you to consecrate it with a permanent blemish, it wouldn't become fully holy. Holiness does take effect on a Temurah, even though it has a permanent blemish. Shanemar, because the Torah, when it describes the whole prohibition, it says, Oira b'toiv. Don't try to exchange a bad animal for a good one. What is bad? Bad means not bad in quality, bad means bad halachically. It has a blemish or something like that, where it cannot be offered as an offering. The afal became kasub by yiyah. Nevertheless, Torah says that if you try to do that, if you try to put a bad animal in place of a good animal, yiyah it's going to be holy. Torah is clearly overriding the general rule and saying that in this case, holiness can devolve on an animal with a blemish. Halacha vav, we now have a case of mixture, and it's important to follow along as the confusion progresses. So we have like this: Oyla shenisarva bizvachim. We have a burnt offering that got mixed into. Zvachim literally means sacrifices. The commentaries here say that it's a shlamim. It's a peace offering. Okay, so we're going to call this mixture over here, there's one burnt offering wandering around a bunch of peace offerings. That means that every single animal, please pay close attention, every single animal is either an oila or a shlamim. You just don't know which one. Vehemir ba'achas min ataruvis. Comes a person, he grabs one animal from the mixture, that's going to be this guy, which is either an oila or a shlamim, and he does Temurah with it. That means he tries to put this animal, which is unholy, in place of this animal. This first animal, again, is for sure holy. It's just either a burnt offering or a peace offering. This one now has been put in place of that, which means, as I write over here, it's a Temuras oila or shlamim. This is an animal that's been used in exchange either for an oila or for a shlamim. You don't know what is going to be. Typically, what is the law with such an animal? We already learned. When an oila and a shlamim get mixed, what do? You have to wait till it gets a blemish, till both get a blemish, really the oila and the shlamim, but whoever is using one. You wait till they get a blemish, and then you bring a proper oila and a proper shlamim. You have to bring both animals. So therefore the Temurah would have the same law. You would have to bring an oila and a shlamim. The problem is the rabbis were worried that maybe in the meantime you're going to forget that it happened, this mixture, and when it comes time, you're only going to redeem it for one type of sacrifice, not for two. Therefore, right now, Once this issue takes place, you have to take care of this potential issue and make sure that you put aside a second animal to be offered as the other potential sacrifice, either the oila or the shlamim. Therefore, says the Rambam, Hareze mevi behema acheres. You have to bring another animal, a third animal. We'll see in a second, I'm going to bring it into the picture. The oimer, and you have to account for both options. Here's the first option. Im tmuras oila hizu. Okay, here's the third animal. And now we're going to assume that the original animal, which you pulled out of the mixture, that was the oila. That was the one burnt offering that had got mixed into the peace offerings. Which means that when you did the temurah, this one, you were doing the temurah of an oila. So you tell yourself, if this animal is the temurah of a burnt offering, hare behema zu shlamim. So this other animal, I'm just consecrating it as a peace offering. Because really, all I have to do is bring a burnt offering, because that's the temurah of an oila. I just want to make a peace offering just in case. On the other hand, though, watch as the red colors change here. V'im temurah shlamim hizu. There is another possibility that everything is the opposite. This original animal was a peace offering, which means the animal that I used for temurah was also a peace offering. So what do we do with the oila? Hare behema zu oila. This new animal that I'm putting aside is going to be an oila. So you account for both options, and you make now two animals holy to take care of this mixture of oila and shlamim. V'nimtza. And now what happens? You're going to have these two animals. Habehema shehevi im hatmura. This new animal which you've brought into the mixture, plus the original animal which you used for temurah, ka'oila shlamim shenis arvu zeh bazeh, will be treated like a burnt offering and a peace offering that got mixed up. And the same laws will apply to this. We'll sell them. We'll bring a very good quality oila and a good quality shlamim, and beautiful. We've taken care of all the issues. We've accounted for all possibilities of the original animal, and we've put aside two animals to take care of the oila and the shlamim. Now it gets further complicated. Chazar vehemir be'achas mishtein. You have these two animals that are holy. And pay attention how they're holy. This one became holy because it was used in exchange for the original one. This one was made holy almost in a definitive way, because you actually made it holy. So both animals are holy. And now, chazar vehemir be'achas mishtein. You did a temurah with one of the two. So now the three from the last case have been kind of made smaller and zoomed up over here. This is the original animal taken from the mixture. This is the temurah, which is either an oila or a shlamim. And this is the new animal which you've sanctified, which is also either an oila or a shlamim. You come and you take a fourth animal here, and you did temurah with one of these two. One of the original set. And you don't know with which one you committed temurah. Now pay close attention. If you did the temurah with the temurah, so we already saw in chapter 1 that there's no such thing as temurah's temurah. No such thing as an exchange of an exchange. The exchange concept only travels one level further. At a second level, this is completely chulin. This is completely mundane. But if you did the temurah with this one, since you had actively sanctified that as either an oila or a shlamim, it's not a temurah, it's an actual sacrifice. And when you do temurah with an actual sacrifice, it becomes temurah. It becomes holy. That's what I wrote over here. It's either temurah's temurah, it's either an exchange of an exchange, in which case it's totally mundane, or it's a temurah's, it's the exchange of this animal, which is both an oila or a shlamim. So you have to account for both options by bringing in a fifth animal. Maybe zevach acher mitech beisai. You bring another animal. And in this case, zevach does not mean shlamim. Zevach means a new chulin animal. You bring a regular animal, the oimer al hatmura shniya, and then you make a condition about this second exchange. And you account for all possibilities. You say, im tmuras temurah hizu. If this animal is tmuras temurah, what does tmuras temurah mean? It's completely mundane. It's an exchange of an exchange. So I don't need this second animal either. This animal that I'm bringing now, that I'm introducing now, is also unholy. However, if the animal, where's the other case here? Watch as the red text changes to the bottom. If it's a temurah of an oila or a shlamim, well then I have to take care of it. One animal is going to be an oila, and I need another animal to be a shlamim. So I want this new animal to also be either an oila or a shlamim, depending on the case. If this is a shlamim, this should be an oila. If this is the oila, this should be a shlamim. And now this set, these two animals, are going to be treated like a sacrifice and an exchange that were mixed with each other. And we've already explained the laws of all types of mixtures in the laws of disqualified sacrifices. In this case, the law would basically be, since they're a doubt whether they're a temurah or a regular sacrifice, you would leave them to graze till they get a blemish, and then you bring the money to whatever it is, the proceeds of oila or shlamim. If you have a peace offering that got mixed with a firstborn offering or a tithe, two holy animals mixed, and you did Temurah with one of them. So here we don't follow this whole puzzle that we just followed in the last case. These animals are not to be offered. Why? Because the Temurah of a Bechor and of a Meiser are never offered. So there is so because it's a doubt, maybe there's a Bechor or a Meiser here, you can't offer it. You let it graze till it gets a blemish, redeem it, and you eat it with the holiness, sanctity of firstborn or animal tithe, as we explained earlier in the chapter.